I'm in the final stages of this drawing where I am completing the tonal layer, and I am going to, after that, I'm going to complete the tonal drawing with all of the edges considered. So I've developed some of my edges here in the process of working this drawing already, but I'm going to go in here and do what I've been calling a modified cross hatching, and it's because I'm using the side of my pencil because I want a lighter, sketchier feel to my marks. I'm going to go in here and finish filling in the background, darkening all of that up. And this is part of developing the edge too. So I'm developing the edge of the table where it separates, where the table ends and the wall begins. And I'm going to go in there and just make that a little sharper, but because it's in the background, I don't want it to be too sharp. I don't want it to be as sharp as my edges in the foreground. I'm going to keep going over this in a light manner with marks going horizontally. Then I'm going to go back over it with marks going vertically so I get a nice saturated look here to my paper surface, and I don't have just one where I don't have a lot of that, not one, but rather I don't have a lot of the background of the paper coming through, where I don't have the white showing through. Get it nice and saturated so the value of the that I want to achieve is what I'm actually achieving. So yay. All right, I'm going back over this way and just more completely resolving that value. Get a really nice resolved value where it's really nice and consistent throughout. I'm keeping my paper over here so that way I can keep from smudging and lifting graphite and getting it all over my hand and lifting it from the paper, because if I lay it down, I want to keep it down. So I'm going back in here and I'm going to darken this again just a little further, push that value just a little further, going back over it again with one more horizontal swipe, and I'm going to extend that out here so I get a nice transition. I don't mind that I get right over my apple because I know that in here I want to go darker anyway, and it's not going to hurt the development of the value in the apple, so I can just blend that right through, and it helps with that smooth look that we're looking for here with blending. Just helps give that surface a uniform look. So there we are there. I'm going to make this darker and have it slant just a little to indicate that the light is playing on the wall too, so I have a sense of a light acting on my wall too. So it gives like dimension and volume even to a flat wall. I'll go back over here, make this a little darker and try to re-emphasize that slant that I was looking for. Just give that sense of light there in the back, that atmospheric perspective, a little haze. So I'm just going over here, lastly, smoothing it up with my pencil in a diagonal direction, taking that right down to there. And then that gives me a really nice background. I feel like I've gone a little bit too dark here. It's a little darker than the rest of the background. So I feel like I can take my background just a little darker then. I'm not going to make that lighter. I'm going to make my whole background darker. Give a nicer sense of contrast between the table and the background. Then taking that in there, getting that line defined, but also keeping it sort of smoky, because that way it'll keep it in the background. It'll give it that atmospheric perspective of looking like it's in the background, because it's not going to be as sharply defined as the edges in the foreground. Darken that up just to give the relative value. So I'm lighter over here, and then I've got that gradation where it goes over and is darker on that wall because it's farther away from the light. I'm going to go in here and darken up this edge down here just a little between the wall and the edge of my table that the apple is and my lemon setup is setting on. Darken this up here just a little bit more. Go back in here, make a little bit more of a sense of a continual line. Take that shading all the way over to the edge of my frame. Then change that direction a little, make it a little more easy for me to access, and go a little bit more with the cross-hatching action over here, since I had just only gone vertically with these lines before. I'm going to go a little horizontal with them now. Go vertical again. You don't necessarily have to make sure that you get an even amount of vertical and horizontal strokes in, as long as you don't have a strong directionality to your shading once you've finished. And if we look here, we don't have a real strong directionality going on here, where there looks like there's big streaks going through that background, or lines that just pop forward and don't belong in there at all. I'm going to darken this all up again here too, and just get a little darker back here. Again, I feel like the balance of this drawing can handle a little more value loaded in here. I'm going to get this just a little bit darker in here too. I'm using my 2H, and okay, so I feel like that's a pretty decent gradation where I've got a nice dark background, and I'm looking at just doing an assessment of this now and deciding where I need to go with these tones. I feel like I can go darker in here in my main cast shadow. So I'm going to go in there with a B and darken that whole area back there up. And again, I'm going to do a horizontal hatching first. I know how far out I want to take this same value. I'm going to be taking it all the way out to here, and then I'm going to start dissipating it. So I feel like I can be pretty liberal with my strokes. If I go into the darkness of my apple, that's okay, because that edge of the apple is darker than this entire surface of the shadow that it's casting. That's the nature of dark red. That's why this exercise involves a dark red apple, is because dark red winds up having really black tones in it when you look for, when you translate color into tones. Red has just those low darks, darks, and blacks in it if you're looking at the Denman-Ross scale of values. So I'm going to do just a little bit of a circular motion with my pencil. Again, I'm not really going to be doing blending with blending stumps, but this is one of the ways that I feel it's good to blend the surface of an area where you've cross-hatched, is use a little bit of blending action with a pencil. I'm going in those doing that little circular motion on top of all of this. Gets rid of that sense of directionality that can be too common with cross-hatching. So I'm just taking this out here and observing the general shape of that cast shadow out here and not loading quite as much of the graphite out here. I'm backing off of that pressure already. Feel like I can go in here and load a little more in there. Going sideways now, doing a little diagonal and another little diagonal. Easing up on that pressure. So I'm going to take this all the way out. I feel like I can go fairly dark out here. It's still going to be lighter than this value in here. And give a little bit more structure to that shadow, but not so much structure that it looks like a hole. And then you see I've already got that value out there planted, so it's doing a nice little diffuse into it already. So I'm just going over this really lightly and just sort of filling in the blanks, really developing the shape of that shadow in there, getting it to look a little bit more like the shadow that is actually being cast, and getting that diffused out, loading a little more value in there. I'm going to go in here and load just a little more value in here so this part of the shadow keeps up with the depth of value in the back here, because that's what I'm really observing, and I have not gone in and fortified this shadow with the value it really can go down to. Go back in there, fortify that shadow. And I have like a nicer sense of diffusion where this takes on a deeper value. And then this is just sort of that circular polishing action. Taking some of this out here where I get that sense of diffusion happening. All right, so I think I'm pretty happy with the tones in that shadow. I'm gonna go down and finish developing the tones in the shadow and the lemon, bring them down to similar tones that we're seeing in the apple. Because that's definitely one thing that winds up being true, is that just because a darker object does not cast a darker shadow. So just because an object is darker in value than another one, it does not cast a darker shadow. That's just depends on the object's transparency, and both of these are solid objects, so they have no transparency limit. A light rather does not get through the surface of a lemon any better than it gets through the body of an apple. So that's just the physical properties of the density of the fruit, as opposed to any kind of value related to the surface, any value or tone related to the surface. There's no correlation between that. So I feel this is developing in here really nicely. I think I can go in here and make this area in here where I've got a slightly more of a cast shadow in here, where this part in here is fairly dark. And this is where I'm already defining edges now too, because I'm going to go in here with a 6B and really get this nice and dark underneath this area of my lemon. And I'm going into the shadow, and you see I can do an outline, because it's not going to stay an outline. I'm going to just diffuse that out into the darkness of the shadow already, and then go back up and build up more graphite right along that edge where I had done that outline before. So it just goes in there, and see how nice and sharp that edge is now. And then I've got some room to go a little darker in here. Now that I've darkened that up, I've got the relative tones, and that gives me like a visual freedom to go darker, because sometimes it's really hard to give ourselves permission to go darker when we haven't gone black enough with our blacks, so it's really hard to get those, like give ourselves permission because we don't have that visual permission in front of us. So once you get the relative tones, the dark tones down a little more thoroughly, it gives you that visual permission to go darker with your tones. And then it gets more of a naturalistic, realistic look to it with the values you're shading. And so look, do I like the shape of that shadow? I think so. I think I want a little more structure here on this end. So I'm going to go in here a little more and develop the roundness, like a sense of roundness to the edge of this shadow here. And give it a little bit more structure. Not so much structure that I don't retain that sense of diffusing on the edges. And you see, you can go in here and play with the edges and polish them. You don't, every single stroke does not have to be a true straight-on hatch mark with no tilt to your pencil. You can take liberties in this exercise, and part of the liberties that you might find yourself taking, and this, I'm back to my B, is with your shading technique. You can use the side of your pencil to burnish or polish the tones in, so that way you have a more consistent tone. You get rid of that idea of excuse me, of all that directionality. And I'm going back in here now with a 4B to really do a nice little polish. I don't want to get too dark in there, and so that's the other reason I'm using the 4H rather. All right, so I feel like I'm pretty happy with those tones and the shadows. I'm happy with the tones in the background, so I'm going to take my focus in and get this lemon finished here. Finish the tones in the lemon, then I'm going to drop down and finish the tones in the apple, or rather go up. I think I'm going to do it the other way around. So I'm going to go and do all of the dark tones in the apple, and who knows, maybe I'll wind up doing them together a little bit. So I think I'm going to develop the edge between the lemon and the apple. I want to go in here and make this edge in here a little flatter. I think I'm going to go in there because I've got a lot of room to move with my values in here. So I think I'm going to go in there with a 2B and really refine that edge and get at the contour that I feel is a little more accurate. So this is really nice and round. What I'm looking at in front of me is it's a little flatter in through here, and it gets about to here on the lemon, and it shifts and it goes flatter in here too. So I'm just building that edge already because I've got a lot of room in here to go darker. I'm using a sketch-like stroke, and then I can go in here and darken all of this up because all of this area is darker than what I'm actually seeing in my drawing here. So I can go in here and make all of this darker, and that's why I knew I had the liberty to go in and put that outline type of mark down, because I'm going to be going that dark with my that whole shape in there. I'm going to go back in here and do the darkness, the darkest points of the apple now. Let me get this back, switch this way, because I want it to correspond to what I'm looking at just a little better. So this is about where I am, where I want to go in with that darkness. This comes back a little bit more here. All in here is really nice and dark. And I'm just going to go in here and this loading that value in there, getting that a lot darker in there. And then even going in here and getting it darker in here too, where I go up to just slightly above the shadow. And I'm going to, I've got a sharp tip here on my number 6, so I'm going to go in there, and I don't like it when I get the shadow of my hand on there, so I'm going to move that so I don't have that shadow coming there. And I'm going to put an outline there because all of this value in here is this dark, and you see I'm putting it on the inside of the apple, drawing so that way it moves this way, because all of this in here is the dark black surface of the dark red apple. And this can take basically it's like absorbing that into the body of that shape. I'm going in here and really darkening that. So now we see how much darker that shadow is than, I mean, the dark side of the apple, the shadow side of the apple. We see how much darker it is than the actual shadow that's being cast. I'm looking here, and I've got a little bit more room to go a little darker in here. And then you see how nice and crisp that edge is between the lemon and the apple. Going in here, I've got room to go darker in here. This moves over here, this darkness, and I'm going to just shade and color that in. This that comes down, goes over there. This is all dark in here. Dark in here, goes up to here. So I'm going to take this area and just darken all of that up. Taking right in through there. Just doing all of that in there with a mostly horizontal, vertical stroke. And then going back in there with a little bit more horizontalness to it, and going back and forth with darkening up that whole area in there. This goes about to here. This can be darker over here. Okay, and then this comes down and slants around like this. It's got a really nice little slope there. This comes in through here, and then it gets just a little lighter in through here. Okay, here we are. There we go. That looks pretty good in there. That's going to give me room to do that in there. This comes in through here, goes back a little bit to there, comes around, rounds back there. And I was doing all of that with my 6B, so I'm just going to go in now with my B and get all of this area in here darker as well. Just drop this all down in tone. So I want that there. This comes around here. This goes here, comes back around here. And I've got it to about there. So I'm going to take all of this and shade this in, drop it all down. If I go over that black area, again, that's okay. It's not going to interfere with the value. It'll just make the surface more completely dark, and that's just fine. So I'm going in here again with my B and darkening in this whole surface in here, sharpening up this edge. You see I'm going over it a couple times, probably making it darker than it really needs to be, but that's going to be okay too, as long as I don't leave it looking like it's this really sharp outline. And so you see I'm diffusing that down into the body of the apple, taking this and getting that really nice and dark in there, coming all the way around like this till I get down to this area and drop this all down really, really, really nicely over here. Get this really nice and dark. I've got my B, so I'm going to go here, and this is refining that edge. So again, I don't want my hand crossing into my light, and I've got my light over there and it's not interfering with my setup, so I have to leave everything in place so I don't mess with my setup. So see, I went in there with a nice little outline on the inside of the apple. Then I'm going to just take this value right up to that surface and blend it in, so that way I don't have a harsh outline for my edge, but instead I've got where it's being defined by the value of the surface. So value, tone, those are all good interchangeable words. So just developing this and refining these values just a little more. I've got all of this room where I can go in here and drop this down. I'm doing this circular motion again. This is more of just a polishing the surface motion. That looks like it just jumps too much if I take a look back from it. So I'm going in there with my B. I think I might go in with a little heavier pencil with my 4B and darken that up, because I feel like I've got room. Again, from the distance that I'm looking at it from, it's a little bit too much of a high jump in value, so I'm going to push that value down to a low dark to get it to blend into the black areas just a little better, and so that black doesn't stand out so dramatically, so drastically. And I'm just going in here and darkening up that area using a hatch stroke, and then I'll go back in and do something of a cross hatch. So again, I want my marks to be softer than the way Dennis did his in the book. So I'm using the side of my pencil to get my hatch marks in there a lot more liberally, and then you get a sense of the pencil actually doing some blending work while you're in the middle of drawing. So that's dropped that down nicely, but I want to go darker in here. So in order to be able to go darker in here, I'm going to have to push my tones in here even more. So I already had the general shapes that I want figured out, but now I'm just refining the idea of the relative tones. And you see how white the lemon is looking now already. So that's going to let me go in there and push some of those tones down. We see how bright that looks now because everything is relative, especially when it comes to shading. I'm just going to go in there and go a little darker too, try to get this area to keep up with the rest of the area over here. And we go like that. Get a little bit more roundness, a little more form happening in there. Take that all the way up and take that all the way up. So now I'm like helping define the form of the apple too. You see how it gives it more of a moving around type of impact. This looks still a little too white in here. Going back in with my 4B to polish out these areas and just get them a little bit more refined so they hold their identity better. And my apple's already looking really nice and shiny, so I'm happy about that. So now this area here in the back of the apple, it keeps up in value with this area here in the front of the apple. So I'm just gonna go in there and play myself a nice little coloring game and sort of like playing coloring book, but this is a little more, just a little more advanced than coloring book. So, okay, this all is about the same value as this here. So I feel I'm gonna use this for my guide and go in here and darken all of this. I know I can, now I'm still doing where I'm defining that edge or refining the edge, so I can go in here and I know I can go fairly dark in here because I see how dark this is in here, and this is going to allow me to go in there with and be fairly sure of myself and go in with confidence and establish that as a darker edge. I don't know that I'll leave the edge that dark, but I just feel good about seeing it there right now. So I may take it down later, down in tone, but for right now, I'm going to leave it about that value and just color this in. I want a little bit more of this front edge. I want it to be lighter, and it looks like I went into the went in there a little too deep, so I'm gonna lift that up. And if it's too high in value, which I'm sure it is, then I'm going to take that back down with probably a 4H or something like that later once I get back in and develop tones a little better again. So I'm pretty happy with that, and just define these little edges so it leads my viewer's eye onto the idea that that's sort of a uneven surface. I think I'll leave that out there for now. Again, go back in here and develop this edge. So I'm using a sense of an outline, except I'm not just relying on leaving that outline like that. I'm going to be filling in that value. So I'm gonna take this all the way over here and over to about this edge, and this is where the values shift. This comes in through here, and this is really nice and dark back here. That goes up like that. This is really nice and dark here. It slants down overall, and here we go. Okay, and this can come over and do a little number like this. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go in here with my 2H and take this down in value so that it doesn't look quite as reflective as this side over here, because all of this is still in shadow. So I want all of this drop down a lot more in value. All of this in here, this will define the that core of that apple and allow it to drop down in space a little bit more if I go in here and describe that edge in a different value. And you see I'm going around, and it's okay to leave directional marks when they go the direction of your surface, sort of like doing contour lines within your stroke. And those are the kind of marks you want to make and leave behind. So let's get this just a little darker again to give that whole, start finishing up this drawing and getting the values just super refined here. So going down here, this is all going to be darker in here. So I'm going in there with the 2H, but it doesn't look like the 2H is getting the job done. It's not dropping it down in value as quickly as I want it to. So I'm going to go back in there with my B and get it drop down a little faster with my B. And drop that down, drop that down. Take that over there, drop that down. Bring it down a little. It looks like it's got a little bit of a square surface there. Comes around here. Follows the contour of the apple. I think that squares a little bit more over there. All right, this is finishing up, getting finished up. Going in, darkening this whole area up. This is not quite as dark as this, but it's darker than I have it now. So there's not as much contrast between this area and this area. That surface stays consistently dark throughout, but because there's more light playing on the surface over here, we're going to get that darkness. It's not going to be quite as dark because all of this is in shadow. This is all in shadow still. This goes up here like this. This comes around over here, and I'm gonna fill that value in. Come down and around here. Again with the contour of the apple surface. Go around here, down here. All right, get a little darker in there towards that reflection to get some of that contrast going. And that is going to help that white pop out way more because it will have more contrast than it currently does with the rest of the apple. All right, just taking the surface down in value. And getting it right up there against that lemon, building that really nicely, and getting this a little darker too. That comes out over there. I think I'm going to switch pencils again and go back to my 2H because I want this surface here. I want this darker, but I'm not ready to go too dark with it. So I'm going to go back in here with my 2H so that way I have there we go. That's just a nice subtle transition there, just a nice subtle little difference in value. Take that down and go down under here. I'm going to come back in over this with my B. I feel like I can be a little darker in through here. Take this and keep up with that value that I planted in there. So I'm just going up and down with my pencil stroke, taking this here, defining that area as shadow just a little better. Going in here and making this part of the apple keep up in value with its counterpart values. Over here, this is going to be nice and dark, coming down in through here, where it keeps up with this value over here, comes down here, goes up, and there's something of a connection in that shape there. This goes up a little here, comes around like this. Okay, that's looking pretty good. This over here is all darker in value than this area in here. So there's really no white tones in this area here. So I'm going down in here and I'm going in there with my 2H and just going to drop all of that down in tone. If I feel like I need to bring any of it back up, I can go in with my kneaded eraser and pull some spots up. So I'm doing a horizontal stroke for now, then I'm going to go back in with a modified vertical stroke to follow the contour of that surface. And then here's another going in with my 2H. I'm going to define that edge in here, refine and define that edge. So I'm just going to go right up to where I have my edge already drawn, and I'm going to go in and do something of an outline. But again, you see I'm doing that outline where the pencil is on the inside of the apple, going all the way around here, and then I'm just going to blend that in so I don't have that hard outline shape, but I do have a sense of a really nice crispy edge. So, and then I can drop this down in tone and drop this down in tone. It feels like it should be a little darker. I can polish that up a little bit more with my 4H. So there, I feel like I've got a pretty strong edge over there. I feel like I can go deeper in tone here. So I'm going to just drop that down a little bit and take that down out to here. And all right, maybe lighten that up a little bit. Go in through here and do some areas that are darker. There's like some reflections coming in through here, so I'm going to leave those coming in through my apple. I've got a little dark area in here, so I'm going to get a little outliney here, because again, this is just where I'm going in and polishing and refining it on the top. So this is all refining that edge. And that looks pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with that. I do have my 4H pencil, and I'm gonna just go in here just a little, because this has just got a little bit of value in here that I want to plant in there to indicate that the light is moving away from the surface of the table a little bit there. And then just gray all of this out a little more, so that way the white of this table here in the front and the white on the apple will pop out just a little further. Going back in and just refining my shadow structure. Now, so I'm going to drop all of this down, not have any white over here. Just get a nice little smoky feeling over here. And just drop it to put it in shadow a little bit. And then that also helps with blending out the cast shadow. I'm just darkening this up, dropping it down in tone, because it's a little bit in shadow relative to this here in the front, where this is all white here in the front. So I'll be going back in there and cleaning that up really nicely. So I'm taking a break. We'll finish the lemon when I get back. All right, look at that.